Hello, Jennifer. Good to meet you, and thank you for joining me.
Hello, Emma. Thank you for the invitation.
So, let's start then with getting to know you a little bit. Can you tell us about your journey into Quakers? How long ago was that, and why, if you like? What were you seeking, and what did you find?
I've been thinking about this because um, actually this is 50 years. This year is a significant anniversary. And I've been wondering where to start with this because it only just dawned on me that I was talking about 50 years when I was thinking about our conversation. And I actually decided I'd start with the difficult bit because it's one of the things that we tend to assume that we know lots of things about people. And actually, there are key bits that we never find out. At the start of 1975, I was married and I was running a pub. Quite a few people know that bit. Um, and I was married to somebody very much older than me. And for about 5 years of that marriage, it had been very violent. And the start of 1975 was when I realized that it couldn't go on as it was. Um, and in fact, and this is the bit I've only just started to say, I was very nearly killed at that point. The violence was so great, and I had to leave. And it was the start of a year of discovery. And it was the point at which I was able to allow aspects of my life and who I was to come up to the surface. I've described the not that trigger point so much, but the bit more of the process in other places, because it was like an underground river. It was always there. It was always being fed, that river, by other parts of my life, the art that I knew, the books I was reading, the intellectual life, the classic, reasonably good student, decent A levels, interesting university, into teaching, because I did manage to teach at the same time that I was being a pub landlady. And those were all very, very nourishing things, and friends who helped me out of that situation. So by the end of 1975, I was in a completely different place from where I'd started that year in relationships, how I was living, the independence that I had. And in the middle of that year, which was full of, you can imagine, lots of different kinds of crisis points. How do I do this? How do I survive? What do I do? And in the middle of that year, in the summer, um, I was buying a house of my own. And let's not talk about what it was like to be a woman in 1975. Is there a man who's going to guarantee the mortgage for you? Well, no, because I've got a job. It was all of that. And I met somebody who had belonged to what I now think of as that earlier life. And I found myself incredibly jealous of her. Absolutely. We were standing in the street, and I can remember it now, thinking, I can't bear it. I can't bear that I feel like this about you. And I thought, I can't be this person. I cannot be this person. And I turned around because I knew, and I'll come back to how I knew, because this is in a sense, it's the turning point of the journey. Because I knew very close to the house I was buying was a Quaker meeting house. And the whole awareness of Quakers had been part of this underground river. And I went straight up to the meeting house, and it was about 5 o'clock that evening. And of course, it was locked. But on the door was the name of the clerk. And the clerk that year was the father of a good friend of mine who I'd known through school and with whose wife I'd taught at one point. And I turned again and went straight down to their house and said, I have to come to meeting. And they were sitting there having their tea.
Mhm.
You know? And suddenly this person that they haven't seen for quite a long time arrives, sits down, says, I have to come to meeting. And they were utterly, utterly calm about it. Absolutely. Uh-huh, okay. And I went to meeting that Sunday, and that was it. That was absolutely the place to be. And I can still remember opening the what was then the blue book, and it was Elizabeth Fry saying, "Today I truly feel there is a God," and that was it. That was the point of arrival, and it wasn't without, obviously, precedent. So if I then go back to where those places had been, as far as Quakers were concerned, I'd known and grown up with a Quaker family in the village, which, because it was a small rural Yorkshire village, was a bit unusual. And then had gone on to grammar school with the daughter of that family, which was where the daughter of the other family, the one whose tea table I landed at, and I we'd all gone through together.
Mhm.
And so I had been bumping into Quakers right from the get go. And the thing I do remember with great affection was asking I would be about 16, and sort of wanting to be aware of all of this, and asking about Quakerism to my friends' parents. So they gave me a book on Buddhism, which is what I love about Quakers. They'll always be slightly evasive about what they want to tell you, really. And it was Christmas Humphreys, and it was all about Buddhism. But there was something they were saying about the stillness and about the kind of person you could be that was beyond the sort of social structures. And I think that resonated. Then I started teaching. And again, one of the people who mentored me was a Quaker. She turned out to be, it was Hope Hay, whom a number of friends will know. And she was somebody again who didn't have, how to put this, she knew how to look at you and see you.
Mm.
And what she saw was that much more buried person, I think. And she created opportunities for me, in particular, to volunteer with a very new project about helping particularly Pakistani women who had come over with their husbands to work in the mills.
Mm.
The husbands were working and the wives were confined because they didn't have English. They weren't able to. And I was part of a project which was bringing English to those groups of women. And it was just the sort of quiet innovation that I began to associate with friends. And then before that, there'd been a moment when I'd held that awareness of Quakers. And of course, I went to university in York, big deal for Quakers. And I went to meeting in Friargate, ready. You're 19. God's there. And I want to say something eventually about the whole nature of the God experience, which is where we go even deeper underground in one sense. And I thought, well, this is it, this is it. I'm going to go to meeting and I'm going to find God and that'll be it. And because of the relationship I was in with the man I eventually married, there were all kinds of other complications that were going on there. So I went to the meeting, and it was that was it. It was fine. It was there. I was, and I walked back to my digs, and as I put my hand on the gate with this whole inner, this is where I'm meant to be. This is, what's it. I actually heard a voice. It was as clear as anything. And the voice, thank you, God, said, no, not yet. Most people get embraced by God. They're welcomed in. Thank you for arriving. I knew you'd get here, all of that. My God at that point said, I don't think so. And I still didn't have anywhere to put experiences like that, but they were always there. They had that steady beat in my life.
Mm.
They had to be put to one side because I couldn't do anything with them, except at that point, pay a kind of attention that you never forget. So I didn't join the Society of Friends then. And subsequently, I've always said that the 12 years that intervened till the year I was 30, and I arrived at that meeting house and sat there and thought, okay, now, were actually incredibly useful. They were awful in lots of ways, and they were marvelous in others, but it gave me a range of experience to bring to friends. And it never occurred to me, frankly, I look back with some amazement, and it says something about the capacity we have as friends to accept. It never occurred to me that when I applied for membership, which was fairly soon, I mean, it was 77 when I actually applied, that anyone would have any trouble with somebody with my background, because by then I was divorced. I was in a relationship with another woman. I had started an entirely new way of life. I was this, I was that, I was there. And they went, okay, yeah, join. And there was something so natural about that I've tried to hold on to that depth of perception for the rest of my 50 years with Quakers, because obviously from that point, the involvement with the Society of Friends shaped my life in so many ways. And but I wanted to try and tell that bit of the story, Emma, to you, because
Mm.
one of the things I think we do find it harder than we realize to associate our deepest perceptions of God with the lives that are visible to other people. And I'm not saying that
Mm.
very well. And I think now, there's a way in which so much more of people's individual life is talked about, that it's difficult to go back to a time when that wasn't the case, because then in 1976, I also discovered feminism, which gave me another vocabulary for what had been happening and how. And of course, what you got then was so much more of those personal narratives.
Mm.
And there was that whole process of accounting for how you had got to where you were, recounting it, that was actually very new. It was, the personal is the political. I remember the publication of the book Meeting Gay Friends, which was individuals talking about their journey. And you've asked me quite naturally, tell me about your journey into Quakerism.
Mm.
And it's actually quite a significant change that, and I'm not sure that at the moment we are making the most of it. I've been wondering about this for some time, because we can talk with, we see, we're able to talk now about our life experiences, but we are struggling to talk about our God experiences.
Mm.
And it's as if we're always being defensive about the language. And I understand that, for goodness sake. I have resolutely stuck to God language because it's the tradition I was brought up in. It's where my profoundest spiritual experiences were articulated within a biblical and a Christian tradition. And it doesn't mean that I don't understand the metaphorical nature of that and the limited nature of that.
Mm,
What is there to talk about? How do we say it? But it shouldn't inhibit us from finding ways to talk about those absolutely real moments.
mm,
And I wish we were doing more of it now, because I think being tender towards each other in that place might make us more tender to one another in the kinds of social fragmentation that we're having to live with as friends.
mm,
I'm going to say one more thing and then I'll stop. And it was about realizing too that I was coming into a world which was still a very conventional middle class 50s world of Quakerism, when the family
yeah.
was the core of it, and where what bonded people was the familiarity of a community that was based on families and long term connections. And some of what I'm thinking about now is the vast social changes that have occurred in those 50 years, and whether we've done as friends as much as we need to do about building that depth of community without those social
Mm.
structures. Right. Can I stop? Because I'm not
Yeah.
sure I'm making any
No,
sense at this
there's
point.
such a lot there that I'm really interested in a lot of different things there. But can I start by asking you to say more about the God experience first then? Because
Mm,
there's so many things I'm interested in. I want to hear more about the pub. I want to hear, there's all sorts of things. But I think you're right. I think here we are in 2025, and we find these kinds of conversations quite straightforward to talk about personal lives. Um, but there's something in Quakers which you use the word evasive, and I think we are a little bit reticent about
mm,
God and our experience of God, and I don't understand why. And this is one of the reasons why I want to have these deeper conversations, to really try to give people the space to talk about these things.
mm.
Um, so do you recall any significant experiences, or is there anything you'd like to say about your ongoing experience of God in your life?
Well, I I experience God. It's there. And I can identify some very key moments like the voice. And I can remember though when I was about 4, and I think again it's back to understanding children's experience. I was very lucky because I was brought up in a rural part of Yorkshire with a great deal of. I mean, this was when you tip children out to play and they vanished. So my whole childhood was spent a lot outside and you know in nature. But that I can remember a moment of complete connection, the most uplifting connection with where I was, who I was, what was around me, and what was holding me. So that was very early. And it was something that I kept coming back to. And it was like suddenly you'd hear a familiar bit of music or a bell that rang that you knew. And I've always had that sense of something that resonated. And of course, growing up, it was described in Christian terms. It was shaped by biblical language. Um, but I think there was also a perception that within the very hierarchical, very power driven Christianity that I knew was something very simple about being human in God's world. And trying to reach for that and find the moments when that felt true was always difficult because in the end, I argued with the logic. There was a kind of really about miracles and you sure? And of course, the God on the cloud. I mean, you had that one quite a long time ago. But you can't, I don't think you can wholly escape the culture in which your sense of God develops. So the the analogy though, and you asked about the continuance of those experiences, and they have been there, both at incredibly critical moments. My father had a terminal illness, which cancer, which resulted in my ending up giving up work and going to live with him to look after him. And that is a huge burden. Anybody who's done that will know. I always feel now that I'm entitled to say to people who are thinking about it, don't do it. Not that I could have done anything else, not that I'm not right.
Mm.
But there was one moment I can remember. I was out in the fields again near where we lived, and I was absolutely on my knees with the effort of it and what it was costing my partner. I mean, that was something it took me a long time to understand and apologize for, you know. But I remember being absolutely almost on my knees and saying to Jesus, as if, and I'm feeling a Jesus who was a brother, somebody who could be alongside me and just saying, I have to be helped. I have to be helped. And that sense of being physical, as much as if you would lean on somebody, was very,
Mm.
very real. And there was another moment in Woodbrooke, which was a place I loved with a passion. I really did. It was an amazing way to end my working life. And all the other bits that came with it. But I was standing in the entrance hall, just standing there. I don't even think anything particular was happening. And I was suddenly aware of the most extraordinary wave of love coming through the corridors. It was everything you see when you see a tsunami wave moving, but it was as real as anything that you could touch. And it was just filling the building for a moment. And I don't know why, but I remember, being incredibly grateful for that as an experience, but recognizing it as a God gift.
Mm. Mm.
And and wanting to acknowledge that those experiences happen to a lot of people. There's a lovely bit, I meant to get out my faith and practice because I knew this would happen. I'd think of something and then it wouldn't be near and I wouldn't be able to refer to it. But it's a bit about Bernard, whose name I've completely forgotten, talking about everybody knows about God. But we think it's something spooky and strange and everything, and it isn't. It's where we live.
Mm.
And I really feel that, that in the years now that I've recognized these experiences, I know they're part of other faiths. I know they're part of that mystic tradition of connection. I know there's endless versions of vocabulary for them, but there they are.
Mm.
That's where we live, the ground of our being, and those are experiences I wish we honored more. I don't think I've described these. I had to make a choice before we started, and I thought, well, okay, I'm either going to talk about this to Emma or I'm not. You know? And as I'll be 80 this year, I'd better do it now, or else it won't get said. But they have nourished me. They have given me a sense of a connectedness, which has related all the time to other people. I really, cherish that phrase, God has no hands but ours. But
Mm.
at the same time, I live with that paradox that says there is something in the universe, and for me, the word God will do, which loves me, cares about me, knows me, counts the fall of the sparrows, everything else, and at the same time is massively indifferent. Absolutely couldn't care that. There was a moment when I went to see the Jodrell Bank telescope years and years and years ago, and it was another of those moments. And I was with people who were looking up and being terrified by the size of the
Mm.
cosmos. You know, that real, you know, where am I in all of this? And I looked up and I thought, oh, thank God, there's more going on out there that I don't have to worry about.
Yes.
And that sense of relief
Mm.
that said, I have to trust what I've been given. I have to fit it into social constructs. I have to listen. I have to be aware in lots and lots of ways. But I don't have to do it all. No. Can you bear it if I give you another analogy, or
Yes,
shall
please.
I stop talking? Okay. I now think of God like water. The water is everywhere, and sometimes it does terrible things. You know, it functions in so many different ways. Sometimes we channel it. If we don't channel it, it doesn't have the power, all of that. But whatever, for us to live with it, we need vessels to put it in. And for me, and this is, sorry, I've just remembered what the first question you asked me, my journey into Quakerism. And this is what happened for me when I found the Society of Friends in Britain. It gave me a vessel to put this in.
Mm.
It gave me the right shape of glass or vase or cistern or whatever, but the shape works for me.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean it's perfect, doesn't mean it doesn't have leaks in it. I'll beat this metaphor to death if we're not careful, but it's how it feels to me now.
Yeah, yeah.
I
And
was
and you know, you just said something about we can't escape the culture we're brought up in as to how we think about God and all of our spiritual lives.
mm,
And I think one of the things that worries me is that, you've described the culture in which you were brought up in, and I'm a generation younger than you. I was brought up in South Wales in a similarly kind of, religion was a foundation of the society, even if that was in the 70s, it was still there.
mm,
Um, and what worries me today is that because we don't talk about these things very much, and we're always apologizing for using the word God, we're always apologizing for this language we're using, even
mm,
though we think, well, it is important to me, but I respect the fact that you don't want to use it. And 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 it worries me that, we have a responsibility
mm,
to not just the children, but the young people of our meetings in their 20s and 30s
mm,
who, like you and I kind of maybe hear about this in their teens, but don't
mm,
come to it, go off and live their lives in their 20s, make all sorts of mistakes,
mm,
still perhaps even after they've just found the Society of Friends and
mm.
have just joined, but they're still young, they're in their 30s. There's a time when we both thought that 30 was ever so old.
You
But
have no
actually,
idea.
I'm only 53, but still, I
Oh yeah.
know that when I was 33 or 23, I was much less clear in
Mm,
my own mind and in my own experiences. And I just feel a sense of responsibility,
mm,
really, that if they so choose, they can really hear the voices and the experiences of those of us who've not just been seeking, but have found something.
mm,
And what worries me is that this vessel is not a very firm vessel at all. It is ever so, it's made of marshmallow and it's you make it whatever you want. And I don't think that that's always very helpful. It might be very welcoming to begin with, but
mm,
I feel like I just want us to check out where those walls are, and say, well, where are the boundaries, you know?
mm. I think there's what I'm hearing at the moment too, in that understandable concern about the burden of our existing structures, is that constant plea that says, where is our worship? Where is our prayer life? Where is it? Because for me, but you see, again, it was something to do with the stability of the first meeting I went to, because it was, as I said, very family based with people who had lived in the area for a long time. So the mechanics of it was something that they got on with. And the exploration, because I mean, that was the interesting thing, because that was the meeting that also had the first of the Quaker Zen Buddhists, the overlaps going on. But it was an exploration of spirituality. It wasn't an exploration of how we manage all the fragmentations in society, how we take part in sufficient activity, how we measure the demands of movements other than our own, how we the, the there was a kind of quiet authority about the meeting. Again, don't misunderstand me, not perfect for goodness sake, but we have to, I think I'm looking for the word reassert here,
Mm.
that kind of quiet authority that's born of knowledge, not of wishful thinking or apologetic conversation. Because in the end, I can have as many conversations as we like about why, the words are difficult, all of that. But I want to have it from what I was offered from the beginning, which was a place of authentic experience that somebody was prepared to try and describe, and that connected with their lives. And I think because I also blame the Quaker attitude to the arts. I've decided, I was thinking about it, because of course my background then became both teaching English, which obviously was, about literature and the rest of it. Then I moved into arts administration. So I was working with people who had to find ways of expressing a creative force within themselves. And when I say had to, I mean, that was the component. It's like, my asking about your work at the back, and what you felt when you were painting that, but you needed somebody to start you off on that. You needed somebody to say, here are the materials. This is what you could do. Yeah. And because we're now living, I think, in such a complex world of demands in all sorts of ways, there are fewer opportunities than there used to be for people to say, come and just be
Mm.
in that exploratory spiritual space. And I want to say that without criticism. We're moving through
Oh,
turbulent times. Even I now know what it's like to be at the point where all my time is used up relating to the needs of an individual, and where I look at my contemporaries who are in similar positions, the kinds of responsibilities they have, both either to their own generation with illness and disability, or to the much younger ones with the pressures of work and family life. And don't get me started on where feminism got hijacked by capitalism, and everything we wanted women's lives to be and represent and do and to expand and nurture has suddenly turned everybody into an economic unit. So, we're back to the support that people need simply to stay alive and look after children. you know.
mm.
Anyway, that's a whole other bottle of wax, but we are dealing with all of that as well. So all the people who had time to set up those moments of encounter, for
Yeah,
which for me Woodbrooke was so important.
yeah.
I understand. I'm going to say this because it's on record. I understand what has happened and why. It was always a very, very finely balanced operation. And it doesn't stop me grieving that it had to happen.
Mm.
I came to Woodbrooke. Nobody remembers this except me. I came on a 2-year temporary contract because in 1999 Woodbrooke was going to fold. It had 11 years when it didn't, and then it had another, I think, 10 years when it didn't. And then the combination of factors, finance, COVID, all the rest of it, and suddenly got it. But it was that place of encounter. It was one of those places that we describe as a liminal place.
Yeah.
That's what made that wave of love possible. That was all the things I saw. And it was people being with each other in a God space. And that God space was far, far bigger than anything that we could just nail down. And that's why the creeds are impossible for us. Because as soon as you say this is what it is, everyone goes, well, not for me. It's a bit more like this. And where it drives me mad with Quakers when they do it in the wrong place.
Yeah.
I'm now concerned that we're not doing it enough in the right place. I'll stop again, Emma. I can
Well,
be stopped.
so the thing, let me go back to what you said about prayer life and your prayer life, because and let's use, the picture behind me, which we talked about. Because you talked about, somebody had to give me the materials. And as I say, I was a supply teacher when I was given that task to do with the children who didn't show much interest. But they gave me, it's interesting, they gave me a large piece of black paper and it's chalk. It's chalks on black paper. And it was a series of folds to give you the squares and then just the action of doing
Mm,
the circles and the selection of a color.
mm,
And it's just really interesting that I did it with very little thought because I
mm,
was trying to look at all these kids kind of not doing it. Um, and it's really interesting, isn't it? What you just said about providing structure
mm,
and guidance and materials to allow people then to experience something.
mm,
There it is. We kind of,
mm,
um, I look at it a lot, obviously.
mm,
And I just wonder then if we can transfer that metaphor to the prayer life of Quakers.
mm,
And, sometimes very newcomers to Quakers. Is this for me? What am I going to learn? Is this the vessel in which I can build my prayer life, my
mm,
spiritual home?
mm,
But also people who are older in life as well, or older in their experience, and are perhaps jaded and have lost that and think, hold on a second, this used to be about prayer life, and now I'm on this committee and that committee. And,
tell
I
you
think
about
it's for
yeah,
everyone, isn't it? And I
yeah.
just wondered if you've got any observations about that, is how we help people with their spiritual lives and their prayer lives. And I wonder if you want to say anything about your own prayer life or how you feel we give each other that support.
Um, I'm currently not well placed to answer this is what I'm experiencing now. That's because um, the meeting I belonged to, which was in Whitney, didn't survive COVID.
Right.
And but for the 20 years before that, it had begun to grow and develop. And within that meeting were people who had the confidence to set up the opportunities to learn and teach. They ran, there were people who would run, monthly things, how I came to be me, so that we talked about who we were. And it was the expectation as well that we would physically be together
Mm.
pre-COVID, all of that. So there were a lot of people who both had the resources, they lived in homes they could welcome people into, they had the time to organize it, they were the early retireds, and it was all, just that bit more manageable. And we didn't survive because in the couple of years before COVID, we'd lost 9 of the people that had been most active in that way. Others like me were engaged with other things, and relying on the meeting to be kept going by, and then I would come back to it. And then COVID happened. And suddenly, because we didn't have a meeting house, and this is where the dialogue about our property and what it does makes me
Mm.
very, very cautious. I've been a clerk who sold a meeting house.
I know.
I've dealt with Quaker property. It's not that I'm sentimental about it, but I'm also now aware that if you don't have a space that you can call your own, then you have a vulnerability that you really have to take into account. The vulnerability is it is at a spiritual level. And we didn't survive it. There was nobody who could take over a Zoom meeting. We didn't have the skills. we could disperse to other meetings, but the number of people, we were down to 3 people who knew anything about running Quaker meetings in a formal sense. And we all had other responsibilities. So although I love the meeting that took me in, it's 10 miles away from where I live in a different town. And my other connections with it don't exist. There's Sunday morning, and there's the other Quaker spaces like area meeting where I meet people and do things. So how we lost the thread of this one, but this is why I say I'm not well placed now to say this is what a healthy functioning meeting does and how it does it. And I know they exist in my area meeting and they're doing amazing things. And they are the people to talk to now about how it's working. Because what I'm seeing is that other end of the spectrum when it's got difficult and people have got older and they have other commitments and their nurturing is coming from somewhere else.
So how do you sustain yourself then?
Um, we had a session at area meeting on Saturday about prayer, and it was interesting because I actually continue all of that, but it's different ways and it doesn't look as Quaker as it used to. And I was saying, for me, there's just now is a permanent conversation with God. That's the prayer. I'd never had a prayer discipline like some people.
Mm.
I never, it's like doing exercise. I know how to, but that's not quite the same thing. But it's like a telephone call now with God at the other end. It's a constant conversation.
Mm.
And I do feel fortunate that I have all of the years I've talked about to draw on. I'm not existing on a thin diet. I'm existing on a very, very rich one. And I know that I'm in a period now where I have to make use of that.
Mm.
Nothing, the one, my favorite quote from the Buddha, he lies on his deathbed and his disciples come and wail round him and say, you are leaving us. Have you no words of comfort? And the Buddha smiles and says, everything changes. And I feel like that, there's a change for me as I get older and my responsibilities shift. But the depth of that connection hasn't gone. And I am spending some time. And this is partly why I said yes to this, is because I'm still now thinking, how is it in the later years? How is it? How does it work when it can't work like this? But it isn't that it isn't working.
Yeah, yeah.
And
I
mm,
I really resonate with what you said about it's an ongoing conversation. Um,
mm,
because like you, I have no regular daily practice at this time I'm going to do this.
mm,
But there's an ongoing conversation, and sometimes it's a song. And I know many Quakers are involved in choirs, and some of the things that we sing in my choir is just there, or it's a hymn, or "Be still and know that I'm God," or um. But again, I don't think we even talk about that very much. And I think certainly for any newcomers coming to a meeting and thinking, well, what's everyone doing? They wouldn't know that that's what we're doing,
no,
you know. So those are the kinds of conversations I want to encourage,
yes,
really.
because the coming to me, I mean, for me, I've described it. It was an absolute slot into place. That was that. Finally, you know,
Mm,
leave me alone. I've got here. All right. But I think it's really hard to walk into a silent meeting. And
mm,
I know from my Woodbrooke experiences and experiences with Quakers in other parts of the world, and I'm really lucky about that, we are a bit too afraid of structure.
mm,
And because we have a kind of middle class and introversion, I mean, let's go through all the, personality types that are attracted to Quakers, da da da. Um, we are afraid of creating automatic structures as part of our Sunday morning worship.
mm,
And I think we again, you see, this is where I know that Woodbrooke was and play, and I don't mean the learning program can't be as useful, but it gives you the confidence to try something.
Mm.
You set this up, and you know that by telling me, go and watch what other people have done on this, I get a bit more confidence, and I think, oh, all right, if they can, I can, And we all need that. And we know that Quakerism attracts introverts.
Yeah.
It's much, much easier. I mean, we used to talk about this a lot at Woodbrooke, because the thing about it is that the extroverts feel they have to do all the work, and introverts feel that they're never left alone enough. And we're managing all those kinds of things when we talk about how our meeting functions. So,
I think that's really interesting, and I you see I also have the experience that we're a bit afraid of structure, and we're a little bit hesitant and resistant to that, and that it takes a huge amount of confidence to give it a go, because
mm,
it's not just you've got to get over your own kind of shall I, shan't I, but actually there's a lot of people who give you resistance and will
yeah,
say we don't do it like that, and you think, well,
yeah,
actually yes we do,
yes, we
and
do.
to push back and say, well, you know, can you stop being quite so negative and
Yeah,
saying, stopping any kind of new things
brilliant.
happening? And that so it's music to my ears that you've said that. I'm really pleased that you've said that, because that
Mm,
this almost allergic reaction to any kind of structure, even if that's an organized reading of something from Quaker Faith and Practice, people don't even like that. I
no.
mean,
Well, I think the trouble is that we politely say people don't like that, and what you mean is X doesn't like that.
mm, yes,
And we
one,
are a bit
one or
given
two
to an
people.
overall. I mean, the thing, oh God, it makes me laugh. I mean, one of the things I used to say, this is why I told you about my background. At
Mm,
the end of the day, if you run a pub and you're a young woman in those days running it, there was a lot that I was afraid of, but there was a lot I learned not to be afraid of. And now I say, they're Quakers, they can't scare me.
mm,
you know? And I think that was really helpful. It's annoying. I'm not saying it's, the reaction that everybody adores,
mm,
but I do think there's something about learning our respectful confidence that we need to enhance. And the the other thing that you made me think of, when you said people and we mean X, is the other way we have of saying, well, of course I'm all right with this, but X doesn't like it. I'm not saying this for me, Jennifer. I'm telling you for X's sake. No, if you want to tell me something about X, that's fine, but then I'm going to go and talk to X about it.
yes,
You
yes.
know, and we do manage this delicacy. It's all sorts of things. It's social structures. It's and also because we want to belong to one another. We're vulnerable to one another, and we're not good at. We're not good at because we're good at so many things. That's the other thing. I'd rather talk about the things that we are good at. But we do have we have a squeamishness sometimes that's really pointless. And I don't think we it can't be helped by tackling it. I'm going to say this to you because you need to hear it. But it's about saying if we're going to have different ways of talking to one another, we need different situations. We're back to your classroom.
Mm,
There's no point in keeping on saying to a child, why can't you hold your pencil properly? You keep on making situations where picking up the pencil is a step on the way to something else. And you need to fill your own spiritual life with the things it's on its way to. Does
mm.
that make any sense at all?
Yeah, yeah. I'd
And,
like to
and
talk about that squeamishness that you've just identified and bring it back to your experiences in the pub, because I mean, I also think that some middle class sensibilities mean that everything has to be just so, and people don't even they're not even able to have a reasonable, straightforward conversation, even though that is the Quaker heritage.
Mm.
So I wonder if we can go back then to your pub experiences. Tell us a bit about tell us about some of these tales that have shaped you, because I do believe that we are because of, we are who we are today because of all of these experiences. And
Mm.
even though it's perhaps, a short period of your life actually, that it's been very formational. So tell us something about that then, and how it's made you not afraid of Quakers.
Um, well, you're living in a, I mean, you are in bed. Okay, let me give you a bit of background. It, my husband was 17 years older than me. I was his midlife crisis, and the pub was his answer. I do say, without going into the sort of detail I began with, don't run a pub with an alcoholic. This is a really bad idea. Don't run a pub with an unhappy alcoholic, and don't run a pub with somebody where you are the cause of that unhappiness. There were a lot of dynamics there that weren't great, but at the same time, and it wasn't a culture I didn't know. I mean, I'd grown up in a lots of ways, not even working class, but feudal culture, where the pub was important, where there were roles for men and there were roles for women, and you had forms of behavior. And, pubs were the place where, and I don't know, I don't go into them much anymore. But, behavior was managed. And it was managed by the people behind the bar. So when you go into a pub, and I always said it's the best preparation for Woodbrooke because apart from the alcohol, people want exactly the same thing. They want to be recognised, first of all.
Yeah,
You want to walk into a pub and somebody go, Emma, hi.
yeah.
You want that welcome. You want to be comfortable. Please take away the bunk beds and the dormitories from Woodbrooke. you know, you want something that looks as if somebody's looking after it. And you want something that's going to give you contact with people. So you can choose if you sit by yourself in a pub, but somebody will know that you're there.
Mm.
And I learned a lot of that behind the bar. And I also learned a lot about group management because sometimes I'd watch somebody being excluded from a group and watch how the group was doing it and watch how they were marginalizing that person and think, I don't like that. I'll fix that, you know. And you can. You do not have to say, I'm speaking to you, be nice to him. You just get behind the bar and you join in a bit of that group's conversation and then you ask him what he thinks.
Mm.
And you are a conduit.
Yeah, yeah.
That person finds a way through you to speak to the group that's not speaking to them. You know, and to have learned that in my mid-20s, along with things like how to run a business, you know, and to do it when you have no idea what's going on. I remember the accountant who said, do you understand the purpose of the column miscellaneous in the accounts, Jennifer? And I said, yes, it's where I put everything I can't remember that properly what I've done. And it gives you a kind of, and this
What
is
do you
why I
say?
began,
Yes, that's correct.
yeah, exactly. Yeah. But this is why I began with that particular moment of terror, because I can describe all of that, but you have to know that it came with a cost. It came at a cost. And once that I passed out of that enclosed space, once that door had opened, once I was in another world, once I was with people who related to each other differently.
Mm.
However conventional the outer structure was, the way that Quakers behaved with one another was what I wanted and expected from human beings.
Yeah.
So I could move into that. And I'd been so terrified anyway that, I'm not going to bother about, I
Yeah.
mean, really, there was not going to be much of it. I don't mean this sounds so, I don't mean it to sound arrogant, Emma. It's loving,
Don't.
you know, but there were things that Quakers did that you just went, okay, but you weren't going to, you were going
Yeah.
to find what you could give, not what they were prepared to take. Oh God, that sounds awful.
No, no. I mean, one of the things it's really interesting you talking about the pub and then saying I don't go into them anymore. I mean, I do. I'm a great pub goer,
Mm,
and I suppose it's quite unusual, but I go in, I walk the dog, and then I go in and I sit and have a pint.
mm,
And I do love that welcome. And the barman's or the barmaid, they know that I want a pint of this bitter. And
absolutely.
and that's lovely. And I've always liked that.
Yeah.
And I know where I might like to sit and I might chat to some people or might not or whatever. And I think it's just really interesting of being in a place which is fairly kind of democratic and you meet all sorts there
Yeah.
and you have to
Oh
deal
yeah.
with some difficult behavior sometimes, even as a customer sometimes you have to know how to manage those.
Mm,
And I do know how to manage them for various reasons and experiences that I've had. The person who's drunk and being very friendly, and the person who's got a misbehaving dog or whatever it might
yeah.
be, and
Yeah.
what to say and how to
Yeah.
remain in relationship with those people
Yeah.
while saying no, there's a boundary here,
Yeah.
and that is not a boundary you're going to cross.
Yeah.
And I just wonder whether in Quakers, the bulk of people, what is the proportion of our community who have good boundaries? I'm I'm not that convinced that boundaries is something we're particularly good at. So I
Mm,
wondered if that is something you are referring to when you talk about squeamishness. Is there something around boundaries?
mm. I think I do know what you mean, but I tend to associate it more with not with Quakerism so much as with class and with social conventions. At the end of the day, for a lot of very good reasons, post-war Quakerism relates much more to a middle class perception of ways in which we live with one another. And on the whole, I never know quite how to express this. I think good institutions protect individuals. I am now watching, as we all are, what is going on in the States, knowing that the bullies have just taken over the playground and there are no teachers. you know, and I have experienced that fear of being absolutely alone with the menace that other people can be.
Mm.
And if we don't have good public structures, if we don't have good structures of our own, then the individual is constantly forced back onto relying on their own resources. And I don't think that's healthy. Sorry, I needed to kind of say that to get to I think the point you're making. But because our post-war Quaker experience in this country is of committing ourselves to those structures, we became teachers, we became social workers, we became, what we didn't do was stay in that kind of workplace that you and I have just been talking about, or the factory place that the Rowntrees and the Cadburys knew, where you had to engage with that wide range of people and you had to engage with them in fairly structured ways. And then we bring it that kind of familiarity back into Quaker meeting, and it it inhibits us from knowing how to deal with the situations that you're describing. The person who doesn't see the way that they're choosing to behave is destructive or difficult, or how to have respectful conversations about difference. And we don't challenge because we've
Mm.
lost that sense that the Quaker understanding that we have is as clear a structure with clear expectations. And I haven't used the word yet corporate discipline, but this is where it comes in. And that's something that, for me, you see, going, becoming part of the Quaker world as I did, it gave me people whose good opinion I respected and wanted to live up to.
Mm-hmm.
It created a safe ambition for me. It didn't have to be a place of constant challenge. I'd had that, you know. And I think that we really need to spend more time thinking about that, how we're back to how we know one another and why it matters to me that your good opinion counts. Because your good opinion isn't just Emma likes me, it's the conversation we're having about the Quaker world that we want to create and how we want to use the energies and the strengths that and perceptions that gives us. And because we are not, we are a faith group which gave up power. We really don't explore these power relationships enough. And that's why we struggle and we challenge people who have a form of authority and, you know, all of that without thinking about where we're back to the start of our conversation. Where does our own power reside? But more to the point, when does that become more than my power? It becomes our power and it becomes God's power.
Mm.
And these are conversations that, as I say, a post-war world has made it hard to have. You know, I came into a Quaker community where there were people with significant influence at fairly significant levels of society, in parliament, in education, in all sorts of ways. And they were visible as Quakers doing that. Not sure we could say that now. So again, the question of authority and responsibility has become a very different matter. And and we are dealing with all this at a moment when our own meetings in many ways are less secure as well. So
Mm.
have I made any kind of thread
Yeah,
of connection?
well, the thing that I've been thinking about is why we listen to some people and not others. So, I mean, what you were just saying about where our authority comes from, where our, I mean, you said power, but I like the word authority because sometimes people are saying something and you can perhaps sense it's coming from this deep prayer life and this conversation with God. And you feel, even though it's said very quietly and very inconfidently, there's a deep authority in it. And yet there are some raucous voices who are listened to perhaps much more than they should be. And I wonder if is this the same thing that we're talking about? So that's the thing that one of the things that exercises me and the reason that I've started these videos with a very deep grilling of people, if you like, about their prayer life and about their experience with God is because I want to listen to those voices. And when people just don't feel that they're clear enough about that, they say no to me and they don't want to be interviewed. They say I'm not ready for that. And I think that's great. I've got no problem with people saying no. But it's my way, if you like, of filtering who I listen to in terms of your, you know, your thoughts and your observations on how we structure a meeting for worship, for example, or whatever else we might talk about. So I do wonder whether we've lost a corporate sense of who we listen to and who we don't. It's all become very democratic and very, oh, well, we have to listen to this person because they've obviously got a lot to say.
But also, I mean, I wish I knew an answer to that, Emma, because I do think it's part of the change that we're talking about. You see, I knew who I listened to because I knew them. I sat in rooms with them, I sat on committees with them. And there were very many fewer platforms where different voices were being registered. You had a relatively small community. So, you know, I knew when Erica Vere, who was a Stockport friend, rose to speak in yearly meeting that I would listen to Erica. A, because of how she was in that setting, because she knew the right, the the right approach is wrong, but it spoke from within a Quaker tradition. It met the expectations of the way that we set up that meeting. But I also knew Erica because I knew her in meeting. And I knew the kindness that she extended to individual friends. And I also knew the work that she did outside Quakers. You know, the most annoying person I ever found in one meeting. Oh my God, was I irritated by him. Then I found out, smack on the wrist, Jennifer, he was one of the very first conscientious objectors in the Second World War. And suddenly you think, wait, I'm all right, you know, behave, Jennifer. And I don't think it now, you see, you're one platform. I now can go on Facebook and see 3 or 4 called Quaker Space or Quaker Org or Quaker this or Quaker that. And I don't know in the same way the people who are formulating that dialogue. Doesn't mean it's not right or interesting or whatever, but it's a it's a fragmentation that is making the experience of Brittany early meeting different.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not judging it. I'm saying it's what we have to learn to live with. It is so. I mean, I ask you who has also been on this, and a slight sense of relief. I know quite a few of the names. Why wouldn't I? But I think, how do I know those names? And the new ones, newer to me ones, are people who are articulating a Quaker faith in social media, in smaller groups, in different committees with a different, and I have to understand how that, I, I have to let that not be a negative challenge, but a creative growth.
Mm.
And then you come back to my prayer life when I go, right, you sort it.
Well, indeed. Indeed. And it's interesting because you're talking about all the various social media platforms and how as BYM we kind of hold these conversations together.
Mm,
One of the motivations for me um to set this up with all of these interviews is because I have personally been excluded from some of these managed spaces because I've got the wrong opinions about certain things. So because I've got those wrong opinions and I say them very clearly and straightforwardly, I've been told I'm no longer part of that community.
mm,
So so I mean this the idea for this video series came to me as a fully formed idea. I got back in my car after the Future of Quakers conference back in October. I think you were online there, I think, weren't you?
oh no, I was in the room.
You were in the room, right? Well, we
I was
didn't
in the
see.
room where it happened.
Right, well, so was I. Um,
Mm,
and I was there was a number of things I was unhappy about in that conference. And I didn't feel that it was, in a way, didn't think it was that helpful. And I got back in the car for, a 3-hour journey home, and I thought I want to carry on the conversations I've been having. And I thought, and it just came to me as I was driving home. Like you could say this was the ongoing conversation with God. And it came to me, Quakerology, and the picture behind me. I thought, it's my picture, I have copyright. That's a wonderful image. Let's start talking to people. I know how to have conversations. I'm fascinated by people. I really want to understand people's spiritual lives and prayer lives and how they arrive at the positions they now hold. So it came to me fully formed, and I thought, well, actually, I believe, I suppose, I'm surprised I'm even saying it, but I suppose I believe in free speech, and I believe in hearing a variety of viewpoints. And what I've experienced myself in BYM is certain viewpoints being closed down. So I'll give you an example of one of the viewpoints that I hold, which is that pride, gay and lesbian pride, as we might have called it previously, um, I believe in the last 10 years it's moved in a worrying direction, that it's become more sexualized and it's
mm,
also become a so-called family-friendly event. And I don't like that. I worry about that. And I don't go to Pride anymore, but every time I hear somebody, a friend of mine, who says, they went to one recently and there's the furries going past and then there's children in buggies watching these people dressed up in sexualized fetish gear with animal costumes on, which is clearly attractive to children in some ways. And I just think if people like myself as a gay woman can't speak out about these things on a closed group. I mean, this is a public YouTube video, but I was putting that comment into a closed group in a Quaker space. It's managed by staff at friend's house, and I was told off for not for presumably being homophobic. And I don't know, and not, and I just think there's something deeply wrong here. There's a censorship and a closing down, which I just didn't like. And that's one of the reasons which I just thought,
Mm.
I just want to speak, I just want to, I don't want to say harmful and hurtful things, but if I've got a discerned view on something, I want to be able to say it.
Yes, because you see, I go back to when the Quaker women's group started in the late 70s, and Friends Homosexual Fellowship had already been quite active. And the there's there's always been that capacity to close down the dialogue you don't want to hear. Um, and I can, it happened with those groups. And I used to think you can waste energy being fed up with that, and, or you can find other ways of exploring what it is you want to say. This is not in any sense, challenging what you've done. It's just remembering
Hmm.
that experience. So mm, it's something to do with the level of importance you assign to something. I'm not doing very well on
You
this, Emma,
mean by
because,
the
well, the I'm really finding this difficult because it makes it sound as if I'm saying, no, we shouldn't challenge, we shouldn't have different. It isn't that at all. But it's something about staying within our Quaker connection with one another and saying, how much does it matter that this gets said and heard? And how much energy do I want to spend on the fact that that's not going to be a productive channel for that? That there's a kind of I can remember, one point somebody in yearly meeting, we were talking about it come up about, feminist language and all of that, and 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 gay rights. And I'm trying to remember the exact context, but the friend who got up and proceeded to describe buggery in extremely precise detail because he was so outraged by it. And then you have a moment when, all of those who'd been sitting there thinking, yeah, well, we castigate the thing we are most attracted to. And, and it got funny. I mean, that was the other thing. We have not talked about things being funny, you know, and I wish I'm going to have to distract because I don't really know how to respond except in a very tentative way to this perception of being shut down and shut out, because I know it's real. I don't mean that at all, but it goes back to the where am I going to put my energies? And is this actually quite funny? We're not actually a very remember, and it was a lovely friend, and I'm immensely fond of her. And we were and it was an early weekend at Woodbrooke, and we'd had one of those evening, let's get together and enjoy some. And
Mm,
somebody had introduced Scottish dancing, at which I am terribly bad and was having a wonderful time. And this lovely dear friend turned to me and said, "Good heavens, Jennifer, I never knew you could be quite so." And then she paused and said, "Jolly." you know and I think to myself, come on, let's get some
yeah.
lightness back in this.
Mm,
Let's get the forgiveness of laughter into some of this.
mm,
Not the if I don't bang you over either direction, but if I don't make my point to you, I haven't fulfilled my duty in today. I
mm.
do struggle with this, and I'm sorry, this feels as if I've just given you a very flippant answer, and I don't mean
No,
it.
no. I mean, I was banned from that space, and then I thought, oh well, that's jolly good because now I don't have to bother with that
That's
anymore.
right. Does it matter?
Um,
You know,
which I do accept. I mean, I think there's another aspect to that, I suppose, which is when the early meeting is making policy statements out to the world, which I think are deeply flawed,
mhm.
and not actually based on the discernment of the early meeting, but going further than that. You see, that's when I become, I feel like I have to say something about it. So it's a matter of what you feel that you need to say, isn't it? I suppose there are some voices that I just don't think are heard when they're of an opinion that is deemed. Um,
I'm sure that was always the case.
hmm.
But I think it's very interesting. You see, this is another huge area, and I'm just conscious that you said about an hour and
Oh,
so.
yeah.
you know. But really, to unpack our perception of discernment is a whole other session. It really is, because I know from my own experience what it's like to be in a meeting which is, deeply grounded and will still not produce something that satisfies everybody. Can't, in complex situations. You can only say, did we do our best?
Hmm.
And we are right back to where we started, which is, first of all, our best doesn't have to be my best, it has to be God's best. And then I have to accept some training in that.
Hmm.
I can't just go, well, God spoke to me at that garden gate in York, so that's me done for the rest of my life. It's a constant articulation, it's a constant attuning, it's a constant sending out the antennae as much as possible, and
Yeah.
and it won't be right. We're human, it's never going to be right, you know.
Yes, and the other thing that occurs to me, I mean, you mentioned at the beginning about you taught the English to the Pakistani women in somewhere in
Huddersfield.
Yorkshire, yeah, and one of the, I suppose when you say, and in our discernment and our it's only our best, and perhaps it's not good enough, but it's the best we can do. And I'm just aware that this week we're still talking and hearing in the news about the impact of the grooming gangs, for example. And when I was in Yorkshire, I was witness to some of that, and I saw it, and I was powerless to do anything about it. And what I suppose my I want to say that for every week that goes by where our discernment does not prevent a tragedy unfolding like that, that's another week where those girls are getting. Do you know what I mean? Every time we don't do something that where we see real tragedy, where we see real pain, and that, we
Yeah, but
go on.
I'm really cautious then about your ambition there, Emma. you know
About what? Sorry, say that.
well, that the tragedies that unfold, the where we don't do, the where we haven't done, I am back to the the danger, I think, of our particular approach to how we structure ourselves, and the fact that we've given up power. We don't have hierarchies of priests. We don't have the dangers that, that brings with it. But we also, there's a hubris there that says, we have found another way of doing things and it will solve all these problems. We must address them all. And I worry about that because it's so unrealistic. I do not mean that we shouldn't live in a state of awareness. But if we live in an unreal state of expectation about what we could, should, must, ought to be doing, and then castigate ourselves because the breadth of that, it doesn't meet the ambitions of each individual, we're back to the nature of our corporate discipline.
Mm.
And also the forgiveness of God.
Mm, mm, mm.
The ability to forgive ourselves for failing in these respects. And I'm also really, really cautious now because the megaphone of public of the media, of the
Mm,
press,
mm.
I can't comment on some things, Emma, not because
No.
I don't have an opinion,
Yes.
but because it's not an informed opinion. And one of the things I learned from the best Quakers I knew was to pay attention to some of the facts and to measure what I said and to be more prepared to be both articulate and silent. There's a we're back to the discernment. If I am sitting in a room with people and I have that tangible sense of being guided by God, I know what that feels like. I know it isn't every time, everywhere, every place. God does not care about the paint in the kitchen, but it's a training ground. And I don't think we're getting enough training in that respect anymore. What
No.
we're trained in is what the media wants us to do, which is to have an opinion, articulate it. And I went on a a journalism and PR course years and years and years ago, and it was an editor of one of the big tabloids, and he was really good. But the thing I've never forgotten, he took us through the start of a news story. It was to do with doctors. I can't remember the rest of it. And he said, I want you to watch what happens to this story. And it petered out within 3 days. And he said, do you know why that is? And we all went, no. He said, because there's no conflict. We can't get anybody to disagree about this. And he said, you have to remember all journalism is based on conflict. No conflict, no story.
Mm.
And I don't want to be sucked into that.
No, no, no.
I really don't. So, and that again, I don't, that's why,
No.
of course, I
No,
have.
indeed. I mean, I suppose, I mean,
I was,
one of the things, the way in which this came up in a previous conversation was um, about whether BYM should still be on Twitter or on X. And we were talking about, because they've left it, and we were talking about that phrase, keep thy spirit in hell, but despair not.
yeah,
And which is a wonderful phrase. And I suppose that's my concern here is to not shy away from difficult situations and difficult conversations and subjects, but to be in them without
but
despairing,
yes,
So
but
I
I think
suppose that's where I'm coming from. That
yeah,
these
yeah.
these
I
things,
watched that debate with interest because I've never been on X, but but I'm worried about staying on Facebook now, all of that.
mm,
But you see, it seems to me that that's one of the problems that we're asking other people to do something. I'm not in that position, of having to manage accounts on behalf of a body,
no.
debates on behalf of a, when I was, professionally a Quaker,
Mm,
you were always having to make decisions that somebody would, and you would try and listen to the challenge, but you would then have to say, we have a lot of interest to take into consideration, and this is the side we're coming down on. never going to satisfy, I complete, but to be able to articulate what you just have, where should we stay? That's important then for individual friends to say, can I cope with this?
Mm.
Can I cope with staying in hell? Or am I already on a path which is demanding my energies? And this is, not one I can take on.
Yeah, yeah.
Thomas Kelly, I quote this so often, Emma, and I really, really, really want to remember to say it in this context. Thomas Kelly said, there are a great many crosses in this world. Thank God we are not called to die on all of them. And I tell myself that, not to excuse my failure, but to remind myself of our limitations.
Mm. Yeah,
Because,
yeah. I love Thomas Kelly.
yeah, and
So,
there's
so
right.
let's finish with your thoughts then on the future of Quakers. What are your hopes for the future of Quakers in Britain, of course?
I hope that we are going to find ways of remaining in literal contact, actual contact with each other, and still find the value in this kind of facility. I hope that we will manage the secular demands being made of us in ways that are about releasing energy.
Mm.
I cannot see myself how to do it. And that is a joy. And I don't have to. I did my bit, you know, but it doesn't mean that I don't want to try and live as supportive and engaged a life as possible. And I look at the richness and the imagination of the people who are engaged in carrying this forward, your generation and younger. And I think if we go on saying that we can lend each other strength, and that strength is strength we find in God, and then do the whatever God means to. I mean, I always think of poor Prince Charles at that point, whatever love means. But I understand that we have to wrestle with that. But wanting to be able to be a community that has chosen to love and support one another in order to be strong for other people, that's that's an ambition that I
Mm.
retain and I learned early. Yeah. Hmm.
That's
There you go.
lovely. That's lovely. Yeah. Thank you very much for that. Let's
Well,
finish there.
thank
Thank you
you.
so much for your time, Jennifer.
No, I mean, when I think of all the hundreds of points you've raised, that I just went, oh, I can't talk about that. I don't know. I hope there wasn't too much of
Well,
that.
I mean, I'm enjoying these conversations because they're opportunities to learn and to, I mean, I do try to stay humble in all of the things that I'm called to speak out on and to raise, and that notion of loving each other to give each other strength is very meaningful. I love that. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Emma. Keep
Joining me.
painting. I want to see another picture sometime behind you. Thank you again. Bye.